There you go. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Dean. Welcome to the Dean Blundell Show, where we feature people from anywhere I fucking want. And today is no different. With the height of the problems that we have with our neighbors to the south, I thought I would bring one of those neighbors to the south that is somewhat like-minded with a high profile. He's a podcaster onto the program today to talk about that and much more. Of course, today brought to you by our friends over at Field Trip Health. Go to fieldtriphealth.ca. If you're interested in changing your life at home, ketamine therapy. Yeah, Ontario, Quebec, British Columbia. They have that. They've also got everything in-house, locations across Canada. For people who want to get better faster, ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, pain management, psychotherapy and counseling, psilocybin-assisted therapy, MDMA-assisted therapy, psychedelic-assisted therapy. Works 80% faster, lasts 86% longer, and not only that, you get relief in some cases in hours from something that might have dogged you for years. Listen, be brave, reach up, ask for help, and go and visit my friends at fieldtriphealth.ca. Again, fieldtriphealth.ca. You can book your discovery online, absolutely free of charge. There's no need to suffer when you've got PTSD, depression, anxiety, or any variety of emotional or mental illness caused by all kinds of trauma. Unwrap that trauma. To do so, you need to be in a psychedelic state. And I'm telling you, they have helped my friends. They've helped me, and they can help you too. If you're looking for help, go to fieldtriphealth.ca. Without further ado, really excited to have this gentleman on the podcast today. As you know, the heat between the United States and Canada reached a fever pitch for some fucking unknown reason. Well, I know the reason, and he's orange and he shits himself. But I wanted to chat with an American about their perspective on this, and I was lucky enough to get a phone call from this gentleman. His name's Pete Dominick, stand-up comedian, political commentator. He's the host of StandUP with Pete Dominick podcast. He dives deep into politics, social justice, current events with a mix of humor and insight. He's a former host on Sirius XM for quite some time. He's built a reputation as a very sharp, no-nonsense, progressive voice who's not afraid to challenge conventional wisdom or take on the powerful. He's done it. He's been bitten by it, and he's still moving forward. His work centers on educating and engaging audiences in an accessible, entertaining way, making complex political topics understandable and very funny. He's entertaining. Listen, I can't sit through the minutia of this bullshit, these bullshit political topics unless someone's funny, which is why I really love Pete. And beyond politics, he's an advocate for mental health, environmental sustainability, and civic engagement, as we all should be. So please welcome to the program, former CNN contributor, stand-up comic, and podcaster, Peter Navarro, it says in your...
Hey, Dean. You just saw that now?
Yeah. Pete Dominick became Peter Navarro, former jailed White House representative that is back in the White House, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, that's right. That's how you get in this White House. You have to have committed a crime against, humanity, or just a woman. Yeah, then you get hired. He's hired so many people that are on the record with repeated assaults against people that it almost makes you think that that's how you get in. It's their kind of DEI. Says here you haven't assaulted anyone. You're not gonna. We're not hiring. Oh, looks like you've assaulted several people. Yes, you're hired. Welcome to the White House. Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy you're here. You're on to something, though. I mean, you've got, let's just get to it. It's a Kakistocracy in the United States of America. It's the dumbest people leading 400 million individuals, most of whom have weapons. So, from Pete Hegseth, violently unqualified, absolute criminal, lots of different sexual assaults. Tulsi Gabbard, she was confirmed as the DNI head the other day. Kash Patel, who's been running from the law if he's not the law during the whole QAnon J6 thing. He might be your FBI director. Everybody appears to be fairly good looking, though. You're either a criminal or you're pretty good looking. Did you notice that?
I mean, that's honestly the truth, because Donald Trump, the best way to understand his mania and his motivation is that every day is a TV show. Yeah. And he's casting it, and every day he's trying to win the news cycle. At the end of the day, he sits back and he goes, what are they talking about? Is it good for me? Is it bad for me? Does it matter? As long as they're talking about me. And most of the people that you're talking about that he's hired, he only knows of them because they were on TV.
Sure.
So, of course, they're mostly good looking, which begs the question how I ever got on TV. But it always did make me feel I must be good looking, not good looking enough to be in his cabinet.
Yeah.
But getting back to like the records of I mean, just specifically on sexual assault, alleged or proven, just on that crime alone. I mean, RFK Jr.'s wife, the story is that she killed herself. She committed suicide. But part of the contribution to where she was at is that, like, she found a journal where he'd written about how many women that he'd been with. And it was horrible the way that he treated her. His own wife, that was, I think, I don't know which wife that was, his second, I believe. But the bottom line is RFK, he also assaulted his babysitter, the woman that he hired from his office to come take care of his kids on the weekends. He sexually assaulted her and harassed her several times. She just came out and talked all about it on the record, by the way. He's denied it. I mean, this is part of qualifications. It certainly doesn't hurt you as it does, I don't know, at every freaking organization, high school, company, even the bad ones, even oil companies are like, I don't think this guy's terrible. He's treated a lot of women. And like the worst company, even on Wall Street, even bankers are like, oh, this guy's a real piece of shit. I don't think we should bring him in. We've got a lot of really qualified women that we don't think are going to want to be around this dude. It is a really daunting and depressing quality of, you know, what's gone on in our country, the degradation of moral character being a requirement, much less a virtue for someone to work in public office and the public's interest. You would hope they would at least pretend to be a good person, but that's not where we're at anymore.
No, America is largely based on trying to elect people that have committed heinous crimes. It's like, and I said that the other day, I'm like, the rise of MAGA is literally the broligarchy doing a deal with every single Republican sexual assaulting rapist.
Well, be careful.
Try to keep them out of fucking jail.
You're right. But be careful with your generalization, because you said America is largely about electing, and the Republican Party is largely about
MAGA America. The
Democratic Party has somebody that gets. You could never win in a Democratic primary in America by having the type of records that Republicans have, personal and professional. You couldn't win a Democratic primary. If you did, and then it came out that you did something terrible to a woman, for example, Al Franken, you're gone. You get kicked out of the Democratic Party. So you can't run as a Democrat, generally speaking, much less win. And if you do win, you'll be kicked and do something terrible, you'll be kicked out. Senator Menendez, a Democrat, found out he was taking gold bars from Egyptians. This is a hilarious story if it wasn't so depressing. Democrats dumped him almost immediately. Almost entirely and immediately. And so
but he hung on like a Republican, though. Like, he denied it like a Republican. Like most Democrats, you know, you'd think, or most liberal leaning progressives, you know, they get caught taking gold bars and shoving them in their shoes, in their coat pockets, in their closet by the FBI. They would go like this. You got me. All right. But Menendez, to his credit, he went full on. I don't know what you guys are talking about.
I mean, I can only think of those that did hang on. My point is that the pressure becomes too much because their colleagues and their supporters, their base, won't allow for it. But, you know, Bill Clinton hung on. Al Franken hung on for as long as he possibly could. And so did Menendez. I'm not saying Democrats won't try to stay in office. They're not always, you know, going to just, you know, punch out and say, you know, but at least they'll also at least pretend to be contrite if something comes up. I'm sorry is an effective phrase for most Americans still, and definitely most Democrats. So I would split the hair, and I would, you know, there's a lot of really good work being done by activists and Democrats in power at the local, state, and federal level. And I just don't want to denigrate that, because it depresses our movement, which I'm a huge part of locally and in every way. You don't want to discourage people that we're not making progress, because, you know, sometimes we lose progress. We've lost a lot, but you 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But I never want to discourage people from trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I appreciate that. And there's more nuance there when I'm talking about Americans. We'll get into that nuance between my beloved Americans and MAGA Americans, who everybody can't fucking stand anymore. But back to RFK real quick before we get into a little tour of who Pete Dominick is as we introduce people to you on the podcast network.
Great.
You know, one of the things that made me laugh about RFK, and you go back to the story about his wife and the journal that he read where he slept with something like 200 women, and he would keep track of those women and describe the actual experiences in that journal, which, you know, if you're a philandering meathead, you don't necessarily want to keep a journal of that stuff. So that just speaks to how fucking stupid he is.
I actually kept a journal of the women I slept with when I was a young man as well. I mean, I don't think it's the weirdest thing to do. It's just that it was one page and one name. Great gal, though. Really wonderful woman.
Yeah, I have a similar hit list, as a matter of fact, for my teen years. It's doesn't even take up one of those sticky notes, dude.
It's really just very short.
But like, so that speaks to how stupid he is, right? Then his wife commits suicide over the whole thing, and his response was she was mentally ill. That was his response. So now you've got the empathy play for the director of healthcare in the United States of America, who's so stupid he kept a journal of women he philandered with on his wife. At the time, still had been to rehab 3 or 4 times for heroin. He's a big heroin addict, so you got that going for you. The director of health care in the United States of America is also a heroin addict, who, by the way, said, recently, I was a bad student until I started doing heroin, and then I started getting A's. So heroin's the way to go. Yeah,
right. They should have made him Surgeon General.
He's a vaccine denier as well. And on top of it, and this is just me, likes to decapitate roadkill. And eat roadkill. Did a lot of that in the past. So
he also tortured animals. He's got a really weird relationship with other living things and humans that he's been close to. But I mean, his cousin, Caroline Kennedy, JFK's daughter, wrote this whole letter that hopefully everybody saw. I don't know if it made it up there to you guys.
I didn't see it. What'd she say?
You have internet?
Yeah, in Canada we do. Yeah.
Yeah. So Caroline Kennedy wrote and then read to camera this letter, and in it she talked about when RFK was young, he is a predator. And he would put live chickens and birds and mice in a blender for his hawk to eat or some shit. He's crazy. And you mentioned the worst thing he is not that he is actually assaulted so many people and done horrible things and been dishonest, but he has, I think, been responsible for the death of young people in Samoa, where he misinformed and disinformed, not to mention, I think, lots of people who died of COVID. All those people who went on TV, and I end my relationship and friendships with people who publicly created confusion and fear around the COVID vaccine and other vaccines, have blood on their hands. They have blood on their hands. Vaccines are a public health miracle. And the idea that you would create and sow doubt around that public health miracle, that scientific achievement that we should respect and that we should be so grateful for, because, I mean, as we bring measles and polio back, we'll have to relearn history. But that's the worst thing that he's ever done and has continued to do and is known for leading the anti-vax movement, connecting vaccines to autism, which would make millions of parents believe that it is their fault, that they didn't do their due diligence, that their child is autistic, that they did that, is a horrible thing to do and tell people. Just horrible.
So, Pete, let me ask you a few questions, and let's get into this, and then we'll get into your time in media, because
I want to talk about me.
Yeah, I know. I want to talk about you too. Everybody wants to talk about Pete. But I want to get into that real quick, because you're in New York, if I'm not mistaken, New York State. Obviously born and raised in New York. Now,
Central New York, not too far from Toronto.
Yeah, no, you're like an hour and a half plane ride from me, dude. I could just hop on a plane. I could be there in no time.
Well, I don't live there now, but I grew up in Central New York. I live now just north of New York City in Rockland County. But go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, no. But you're an American through and through, right? You're used to certain norms. You're used to citing science. You're used to, the government being a friend. You're used to having competent people run your country. We'll get into the last 2 weeks of the Trump administration, but, citing RFK being your HHS guy, Tulsi Gabbard being in charge of DNI, Pete Hegseth being in charge of the Department of Defense.
Yep.
One is a former commander in the military, and Tulsi Gabbard, who went directly to. She's also involved in some kind of fucked up cult in Hawaii. And then you've got Pete Hegseth involved in some kind of fucked up Opus Dei cult here in.
Well, he's a straight up Christian nationalist. Did you hear who they just confirmed for Secretary of Energy?
No,
the Penguin from Batman. You can't make this stuff up, Dan.
But do you like? Are you shitting your just shitting your pants right now as an American, as a progressive American, someone who did not vote for this guy? 75% of your country did not vote for this guy. So I want you to take me through your experience right now. I want to kind of download the American experience from an American watching this whole thing happen. The Kakistocracy get formed. Christian nationalists and weirdos kind of assumed positions to be able to do whatever Trump and the cabal want him to do. But like, how are you feeling? What is your vibe today? How would you explain it to a Canadian who sits there and looks at America and goes like this? What the fuck are you people doing?
It's very hard to explain, and it's obviously complicated. It's nuanced, and everybody has their own version. We see things as we are, not as they are, right? You have your own journey in American politics, in your own American life, and that journey is influenced by all kinds of different things, but certainly where you grew up, when you grew up, and the media that you had access to and that you took in. And so if you were sheltered, if you grew up the way I did in a very homogenous community, white, mostly Catholic, Christian, there were no other religions. There's one Jewish kid, Dave Crowder. He's done real well for himself. Great guy, good friend of mine. But, very few people of color, if any, in the 80s and 90s. That's where I grew up. And what were the media influences then? How many were then versus the America that my kids are now growing up? So it does depend on who you ask, and it depends on their experience, their American life, and what media they take in. And so I think one of the biggest differences or most important points to point out is, to Canadians especially, is ask an American how they generally feel about government. And everybody can complain about government a lot if they want to. But in America, there's been a couple of generations of Americans now who were taught by the right in America, leading, with Ronald Reagan, to hate government, to hate it, to see it as the problem. One of the most famous Ronald Reagan quotes is that government isn't the solution, it's the problem. And Republicans for years wanting to make it small enough to drown it in a bathtub, which is a famous quote from Grover Norquist, a Republican operative for 2 generations in American Republican politics. And so they hate government, or at least they say they do. But what they really want are all those government contracts, and they're vying for them as well. Let's be clear. And what they really don't ever do is cut government. So they cut taxes, but they add government. All Republicans always add government at the federal government level, and even at the state and local level as well. And then the rest of us have a general understanding of government's role and purpose. And we're not Ayn Randian libertarians who want to live without, only access to the fire department if you're paying. And so there's a real obvious disparity in views, but I think it has to start with your view of how you see government at the local, federal, and national level. And most Americans are ignorant enough now to not have any idea what government does, what it is, much less what democracy is and what it does, much less what Nazis are. They're right in front of you and you can't identify them, or understanding what fascism is. And so it depends on who you are, your American life, and your media influences is what I'd say.
Okay. Good answer. Good answer. I like that start for answers. It was a great first answer. But I want to know how you feel about it from a progressive perspective. I know you're a progressive. And if I'm in the United States, so I'm in Canada, the idea of Donald Trump makes me shit my pants. Like when he won the election, I was in a funk for about 2 weeks. I'm like, none of this makes any sense. You know that meme about Zach Galifianakis doing math? Right, where he's sitting there and he's like, and all the numbers are going. I'm like, I'm trying to figure it out. Yeah. How is it that a 34-time felon and a rapist? How is it that that a criminal like him, a dude that stole state secrets and hid him in his shitter? How is it after the 4 years where he absolutely committed multiple crimes against the country and war dead and the people that live in that country to enrich his friends and himself? How is it that he gets a second chance? And then I also want to know, with that second chance, knowing what was at stake, and I'm Canadian, how an American feels about this today.
Oh, God. Well, I can't speak for all Americans.
No, I mean a real American like you, not a MAGA
a real American, whatever that even is. I mean, it's so... When you say you're a real whatever you are, I always want to be like, how do you even know what that means? Have you been anywhere else? Like, you appreciate your country. Have you ever traveled to another country? My country is the best. How the fuck would you know? You've never left Ohio, stupid. I mean, really, why would anybody care what you think about America if you have no idea how they do things in Norway or Canada or Israel or Japan or Argentina? Like, you're the worst American, as a matter of fact, because you haven't left Cleveland. You haven't even been in Cleveland. You live in the suburbs. I think that we are, it's hard to say, we're very ignorant on what it means to be American, because we haven't traveled, the vast majority of us. But I think your question, is kind of like, how did he get reelected after everything he did? And, my question when I wake up every morning and cover him for over 10 years now is, why would anybody trust a guy who paints himself? Anyone. Think of all the rest of the world leaders right now, even the other authoritarian autocrats, even Putin. So Putin, I think, had some plastic surgery.
Yeah, for sure he did. He looks very different.
And all of them care about their suits. And Gaddafi wore a lot of medals, and Saddam Hussein and other like crazy leaders. But like in most Western countries, the leader doesn't paint themselves. Mm-hmm. He's orange. His hair isn't real. He's not real. And no matter what your politics are, I would think most Americans would be like, I don't trust that guy. I wouldn't trust him. I wouldn't buy knives or a car from him. I wouldn't get a loan from him. I definitely wouldn't support him. And I honestly, I partly joke, but I partly am like, do you not? I want to say to every MAGA, what do you think about him painting himself every day and leaving his part around his eyes, and he looks like an Oompa Loompa? What really about that? Why would you trust that guy? Why would you trust any super wealthy person to have your interest in mind for anything or on anything? Why would you trust that person? And I think that America, the question is, how does he get elected the first time? He was able to, America's a reality show. We're reality show people. And he was on The Apprentice. I was on The Apprentice with Trump on the season finale of 2004. And when we were taping it, Dean, they asked me, do you want to meet him? I was hired because I'm a stand-up comedian. I was a pretty well-known stand-up comic in New York City at the time. And they needed a host for an event that they were doing for this fundraiser. And they reached out to me, and NBC reached out to me. We're shooting The Apprentice, but this is a real thing. You need you to host this fundraiser. And they said, Mr. Trump is going to be here. Do you want to meet him? And it was 2004, Dean. But as a New Yorker and as an American, like, I knew who he was and what he was. And my understanding of Donald Trump was that he was a predator of women. To be kind.
That was like what? That was widely known that he was a money launderer and a predator of women. Yes.
He had already been married twice, and he cheated on both of his wives, and he talked about it, and he was just gross. He would go on Howard Stern, and he would talk, and Letterman, he would talk about women. He owned the beauty pageant. He was really creepy.
Was he on Stern like not long? I think it was around 2003, 2004, where he said that if his daughter wasn't his daughter, he might have sex with her. Yeah.
And many of us knew things like that. So when they said, do you want to meet him? I said in 2004, does he want to meet us? And the producer said, not necessarily, but we can arrange a meeting. And I go, well, I don't need to meet him. I'm just going to be on this hit show. Mm-hmm. This is an NBC show, not a Donald Trump show. But Donald Trump was able to convince Americans that he was a successful businessman because of that show. Mm. And then a lot of Americans have always wanted someone from the private sector who wasn't a politician. And hey, why not this guy? Well, why not this guy? Because he has no redeeming character qualities. That's why not this guy. And he's actually not a successful businessman if you knew anything, if you read anything. But that's how he got elected the first time. And it's a fair question. After the insurrection that he caused, supported, and didn't stop, and the investigation and the crimes, how did he get elected again? There's obviously a lot of reasons for that, and it's nuanced, but it's very hard to understand how any of my friends, family members, and fellow Americans could see that man and see him in any other light than I do. I have a hard time being open-minded enough to understand, and I talk to them all the time, and I hear from them, but I'm always stuck on, he's a rapist. He hates veterans. He's a thief, and he's dishonest. Everybody that knows him hates him. He doesn't pay people who do work for him. He's the worst kind of person. And he's a fascist Nazi, if that matters. But
I think it does.
Not sure it does. I mean, a lot of us Americans are fascists without knowing it. They're support. If you don't support the outcome of the election. If you don't recognize the outcome of the election as legitimate, you're a fascist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you know what? I did the fascist checklist the other day, and I didn't. It didn't appear that any progressive values were on it. Like I was looking at, a small government in the hands of many people check. Destroying institutions like the Department of Education check. I believe yesterday he authored a memo that said they're going to get rid of the Department of Education in the United States. Check. Get rid of government employees in favor of loyalists. 60,000 people are apparently lined up for his buyout. Check. So you've got that as well. And it's got to make you wonder, right? The reputation of the United States, which I would imagine being an American citizen, you were probably very proud of for a very long period of time. World's biggest superpower, world's biggest peacemaker. You could say what you want about peace that they didn't make in Afghanistan and Iraq and all those other things and places that America went. But that was the reputation. That reputation during the Biden years for the past 4 years seemed to kind of get shined up and propped up, and Americans seemed to be back. America's goodwill seemed to be back. In 3 weeks, all that goodwill is gone, right? Pulling of U.S. aid. Not only did they pull U.S. aid, they decided that they were going to get rid of the Department of Education. People trying to get into the Department of Education this morning are being blockaded by people from Doge, Elon Musk's organization that is slowly trying to take over your payment systems. Department of Education. He's got his hands in I believe it's the North American Oceanographic Society as well. Every airplane like the FAA, they've got their code in there now, and apparently had to fire a guy yesterday. Doge had to fire a guy yesterday that was doing all of this on behalf of Elon with the nickname Big Balls, by the way, just so you know, he's some 19-year-old guy. That can't be good for America's reputation, specifically if you were ever proud of it.
Well, I mean, I think if your nickname is Big Balls, that's not a terrible thing. My nickname was Tiny Testicles in high school because I have unusually small ones. But that's neither here nor there. Yeah. I think the first point is to separate the difference between how we see ourselves and what's happening here domestically to our financial security, our national security, and how the rest of the world sees us. And I think it's just important just to mention, you mentioned USAID, ending USAID, but what you didn't mention is, and as they did the first time around when Trump was president, withdrawing from every international organization that we're basically a member of. Yeah. And the World Health Organization is a huge one. The climate treaty, we've pulled out of that.
Human rights, international criminal courts. Yeah.
Right. We've reprimanded the ICC. We've never been particularly fond of it anyway, because we're Americans and we win and tell you how to behave. And we don't do war crimes here. You do. We don't, even though we do lots of them. And so I think pulling out of all these international agreements and organizations is a sign to the rest of the world that we're not helping you. We don't care about whatever you're doing, whatever your problems are. We're not helping you. We're looking inward. And that's convincing to a lot of Americans. It's convincing to a lot of Canadians. That is a convincing thing. Invest in yourself. Invest in your own company. Invest in your own country. But it makes no sense. It's not real life. The idea, I mean, I lived through 9/11. I was in New York City. I lost friends that day. I smelled those buildings and those bodies burning for 3 months. I still can't talk about it. I'm on the verge of tears right now when I talk about it. My whole body starts to tingle. It's PTSD. And that's when I began understanding geopolitics. It was a beautiful day, a beautiful Tuesday in September of 2001. And people from other countries with their concerns and their anger and their conspiracies flew our planes into our buildings and destroyed so much. I can't talk about it. Why? Why did that happen? Well, one of the reasons bin Laden cited for the 9/11 attacks was because of the American military bases in Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia, where he's from, and he hated it. And that's what radicalized him. And obviously, he always cited America's role in the Arab-Israeli conflict, where we were always, and still are, obviously always pro-Israel and anti-Palestinian. He cited those two things. So when Trump says we're going to go in and bulldoze Gaza, what I think about is 9/11. What I think about is foreign terrorists wanting to hurt America. USAID did as much to protect America as almost anything else. I mean, we investing in other countries, by the way, and helping people in other countries makes your country look good. we pull out, the Chinese will step right in and fill that role. And America will cease to be whatever shining light they might have been on the hill to some poor kid who sees, his medicine and food wrapped in the red, white, and blue. That's not going to be the case anymore. It's extremely dangerous what he has done. And Americans think this America First idea is somehow going to put us first, but it moves us way, way, way down the list in every way and puts us in tremendous danger. And of course, the main terroristic threat that we face in America is from our own. Mm-hmm. The main terrorists in America are white, domestic, anti-government, Christian nationalists. Call them a lot of different things. They're not all the same, but it's that type of person who has committed the most terrorist attacks or attempted to and are planning to since 9/11 by an exponent of I don't know how many. But there's been far fewer foreign terrorist attacks or attempts than there are domestic terrorist attacks from, these types of people. And that is no longer going to be a concern because he put him in the government. He literally gave them J6ers jobs. He brought Stuart Rhodes, the leader of one of the most militant domestic terrorist organizations. That guy went to jail. He pardoned him and then brought him to a party last week, Dean.
Did he really? Stuart Rhodes, the guy with the eye patch? The white supremacist pirate? The guy that was sentenced to 18 years in prison. I know he pardoned him. I didn't know that he got a White House invite to a White House fucking inauguration party.
The most important thing is that the FBI, the ATF, and the other domestic intelligence agencies, security agencies, won't be investigating those guys. They're not going to put undercovers in the biker gang and the Christian nationalist white supremacist gangs and all those, which are, all throughout this country. But now, but to be fair, I'm not sure that they need to, because those guys aren't in sleeveless jackets with tattoos and running drugs to make their money and support their cause. They're in suits in the federal government.
Isn't that, if you look at a parallel, Pete, and I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of people talk about that fear-based aspect of MAGA, Maple MAGA. We have the same issue up here. We talked about it on StandUP, your podcast, StandUP with Pete Dominick. Anybody go get that podcast. It's really, really good. It's really good because I was on an episode of it this week, which was lovely.
Rave reviews. People love our conversation. People have actually been teasing me that we love each other and that we're in a gay relationship now.
Good. Well, that's what MAGA does. To your point, the fear-based aspects.
Those are my favorite listeners have said that.
But the fear-based aspects of how do we fucking get a charge out of these people, right? They get a charge out of us by making you feel unsafe. And so I liken what happened during the J6 pardon, which was day one. I'm going to pardon everybody. I'm going to get 1,600 hardened criminals. I'm going to put them back on the streets. Those are going to be Trumpers for the rest of their lives, right? Justified their actions, justified their existence. Then he pulled out Stuart Rhodes and a bunch of the Oath Keepers that tried to take over the United States of America on January 6th, 4 years ago, almost to the month, right? So you've got these paramilitary organizations that are religious run organizations run by zealots and people who have no problem dying for Jesus Christ, dying for their cabal, dying for their cult. And if you look at how Russia took over Russia, how Putin decided, I need to harden my position in this country. He did the exact same thing. He got all the crazy derelict biker gangs and all the criminals, and he started something that Yevgeny Prigozhin calls the GRU, right? So all the badasses, all the terrible guys, and he started this government paramilitary organization where he gave these guys the power and the ability to literally strike fear in the hearts of people in their country, right? And you see it online all the time. Digital warriors that come after you, that threaten you. When we had our convoy bullshit up here, I published the actual donation Give, Send, Go site. 10 million was raised in a couple of days. I got threatened by Sebastian Gorka. I got 1,400 death threats. I had police stationed outside my house. And it was the same thing. But it's that fear-based aspect of how does a government who is supposed to protect citizens from those kinds of threats then not only not protect them, but utilize those militias. And America has a fucking ton of them, right? Backwoods countries, provinces, states, they all have them. People who believe they're libertarian, they're standing up for their own rights. They're those, the sole citizens or sovereign citizens, et cetera, et cetera. But that's got to fucking put the fear of God in someone like you in your country, watching that fear-based aspect of really militarizing terrorists on behalf of the government at this point.
Well, I don't believe in God. I only believe in justice, and I only believe in purpose. And my influences when it comes to my motivations aren't religious in nature. They are humanistic in nature, if anything. And when I am scared, because I am scared. That's your question, I think. And that's how it works. That's how they win. I mean, George Orwell taught us this years ago when you first read the book 1984 in high school. We actually did do that in public education in America. But we've seen previous real leaders do this throughout human history. And we're seeing it here now in America, fascism. I myself have been the victim of fascism in my town because of my activism and my work on the local school board issues, fighting our local basic white supremacist, fascist, MAGA folks.
You've been on the receiving end of that, the threats already? You've been on the receiving end of that fear?
Oh yeah, for years. I mean, particularly when it all went down in 2022, when I was really effective as an advocate, speaking at the meetings, writing letters, but more importantly, I helped. Well, I got a story killed that a local NBC News journalist was going to do, but I got her the truth by getting her the police report about the story that they were going to do, which was going to really defame people and misrepresent a situation in our schools.
What was the story, Pete? If you don't mind me asking.
The story that they tried to sell was, I mean, it's hard to believe, but they did it. They sold it. Was that the principal of our high school, one of our high schools, we have several schools in our district, was political and was anti-Trump. And this was when Trump was still president. Actually, I think it was a year after. And as a result of his own personal politics, this principal, what they tried to say was that it was filtering into the school atmosphere and the student body. And when a black girl and a white girl got in a fight over something political in nature, he sided with the black girl and punished only the white girl. They got in a physical fight. There was a video of it. Locals posted it on our local Facebook page. And I immediately got involved, without knowing any of the details, that was entirely a lie. All of it, every single part of it, including, as a police report showed, the white girl attacked the black girl. And the black girl retaliated and kicked the crap out of her. But that's the story that they had. NBC News was going to come and say that this school principal's politics were influencing his decisions and the punishments that he was doling out. In fact, the black girl got a harsher punishment than the white girl because the black girl retaliated on social media with a threat, and that's an added punishment. So in fact, she actually got the worst of it. And they ran that principal out of school. And when I got that story killed by giving them both the police report and the school report, because as an advocate, I reached out to that family of the black girl through my daughter. I made contact with them. I created credibility. I got them in touch with lawyers. And mostly I got that story killed because I gave the reporter the records. And she couldn't go with it because then it would have been illegal because we would have had a lawsuit. And I threatened her with that. And she killed the story. And as a result of my involvement, our local fascists called Child Protective Services with a false report on me. And they showed up at my house and had to interview my daughters about my relationship with them. But
Jesus,
that's what they do to silence you. But not only did it not silence me, it only made me push harder. And to my older daughter's credit, who was 17 at the time, when the detective said, I have to ask you a couple of questions about your relationship with your dad, my 17-year-old wouldn't even sit down, and she was indignant. And she told him, the only reason you're here is because my dad's such a good guy. And then she went on to say a bunch of nice things about me. And the detective, to his credit, was like, we knew this was a false report already because your dad's a public person. They're trying to silence him probably, but and this happens from time to time. But my daughter made it pretty clear that I have an awesome relationship with my daughters. I pride myself on that. But that's the thing I'm most prideful about. And they came for me, and and I think most people would be silent and would, stand down. They would. And I wouldn't blame them. But for me, I was raised a certain way, and I lived my life a certain way, trying to be the change that I want to see in the world. And I would rather die, or I'll never shut up about these things, about these injustices, whether it be in my own community or anywhere else. That's what gets me up in the morning. That's what gives me purpose. I have a lot of privilege, and I'm pretty good at it, Dean. So I'm going to keep doing it. Fuck 'em.
As you should, Pete. God, I love that story because it includes, a jump off point for some people who are like, hey, listen, I stand to lose a lot if I do the right thing here. And that's generally what shuts people up.
It's real. You could lose your job. You could lose your financial security. You could lose your reputation. You could lose your family. I mean, I could tell you more. I don't want to talk about it on the record, but obviously it created a lot of problems for my family.
Yeah, no, but that's the goal, right?
That's the goal.
The goal is, how can we upset Pete? How can we upset
anybody? Silence him.
But
silence them.
It ties into the anti-DEI shit that we've seen, right? Which, specifically lately has been fascinating to me. Is, the support of Trump, although blind and militaristic, is really, fully supported by everybody that's got this secret racist agenda. And I said this when Trump got in the first time. It was like, 70 million people, kind of racists, came out of their hole, voted for Trump, went back in their hole. And I'm like, I had no idea America was that racist. And I didn't. I really didn't. We live in Canada. We're incredibly multicultural. I live in a city where 60% of the people here are from Asian countries, 40% are from other. And I literally don't see it, even though I'm as white as it gets. I'm as Caucasian as it gets. I'm an immigrant as well. So, I was brought up to look at the world and the country that I'm in from a little different perspective. But I want to kind of touch on that too, because it had to do with a black girl who was attacked. And then you had the entire MAGA institution threaten you. And that was for racist purposes. They just wanted the white girl to win. They wanted to punish the black girl.
Well, they wanted to be really, it's important. I'm really clear on this. What they wanted was to create a controversy so that they could win back the school board. So in local school board elections, you don't have a lot of controversy in communities like mine. People generally agree these positions aren't really, hard fought. They're not paid. There's no power. It's a volunteer thing. But there's obviously so much controversy and in all ways, obviously along racial lines and teaching English and education and proper history and then sexual orientation lines and sexual identity lines, LGBT folks. And that all those things have become very, very divisive, but we weren't really divided on those issues in terms of policy. So they had to create something. So they manufactured a conflict. There was no conflict, and they manufactured it, and it was effective to a point. And they lost that election, but they actually, because of our work, but they won the next one on a different issue, not a racial one, but an issue around a trans student or trans kids' access to bathrooms specifically. And they convinced people of another lie. And this time they won. And so they don't do it just to be mean, just to punish. They do it to have an issue to run on in a local school board meeting so that they can take power, ban books, and put Jesus with an AK-47 in every classroom.
You're not wrong, man. You're not wrong. And it's so foreign to me, right? Like, it's foreign to us up here, even though we have some of the same systemic issues where, they'll blame DEI for anything. They'll blame, schools and school boards for talking to their kids about their sexual orientation, even though their kids brought it up. And the reason why they brought it up is because they were getting their ass kicked in their religious house for being trans or being gay, et cetera, et cetera. But there's always, this, and I said this to my son the other day, we were talking about it, and we have these spirited conversations about DEI, the LGBTQ community, and he was talking about the trans ban that happened in the United States. To your point, trans students are no longer allowed to partake in sports where if, you're a woman transitioning to a man, you can't compete in the men's sports.
All five of them.
Well, this is the point. 0.004%, I believe, identifies trans. 0.0012% are trans athletes. And that speaks to your point, right? Which is these are non-issues. They should be non-issues for the rest of the country, other than when you see these people who are under attack. And then when you go to bat for them, right, whether they be black, whether they be trans, when you go to bat for them because it's the right thing to do, because it's so ridiculous, it's such a small sample size, specifically when it comes to the trans issue or the LGBTQ bathroom issue, whatever the situation is, when you go to bat for them, you literally don't just get attacked. You get someone calling the cops, telling you that hey, this guy's probably a pedophile. You should go to their house, which is the old fallback for MAGA, right? Oh, you're a groomer.
Oh, yeah, that is it's right. That's their playbook. I mean, I've been called pedophile on social media a million times after my appearances on television all the time, and then in my local community. I mean, even when I would go to the school board meetings, one night they did a really terrible thing to me. I mean, I could I could entertain you for hours with the things they've done to me specifically, much less my, my allies, my colleagues in the fight. And luckily I'm white and straight, but that doesn't stop them anyway. I mean, one time after a school board meeting, I was walking out, they started screaming at me and turned their cameras on. And they started saying, you don't even have kids in this school. And of course I did, 2 daughters, but they're just trying to say that I was going to the school and that I was trying to talk to young people. They said, why are you trying to talk to, none of this was even happened, but they turn on their cameras and then they tell a story. And if you look like me, I do look like a pedophile. I am a white, bald man. Like, I have a lot of jokes about this in my stand-up act. When my daughters were little and I went to the playground with them, if I got like 10 feet away from them, I just look like this guy at a playground. And if I saw me at a playground without kids, I too would be afraid. So it's not easy to paint any man, because there's enough bad guys. I think there's a lot more good guys, but that's just me. And so then they did all kinds of things to me, making up, the worst thing you could do is call someone a pedophile, because some people might say the worst thing you do is call someone a racist or a sexist or some other name, or even a racist name. But the truth is, those words don't create a cloud of uncertainty around you. If I thought that my neighbor or anybody in my world was abusing or assaulting children, I would want to kill them. And that's what they're doing to people like me. When you call someone a pedophile, that is going to take unhinged people and activate them, because it's not an unnatural feeling to want to stop an adult from sexually abusing a child or hurting a child ever, anywhere. That's a normal feeling if you're a good person to have, but you can't lie about it to people, because you could get them killed.
Yeah, but it's the one thing they do. Like it goes, and I've been called this.
It's the most powerful thing. It's the most dangerous thing that they do rhetorically, I would say, or strategy that they take regularly. Yeah, it's awful.
Yeah, they did it to you. They've done it to me. They do it to anybody that disagrees with them.
Then they wear, so often these same folks wear this cloak of religion, and then every single day in America, you see another news story of another man of the cloth, a minister here, a preacher there, being arrested for doing horrible things to women. And in America, there's this great commentator, LGBT activist named Dan Savage. He's internationally popular. And Dan, every time this comes up, you see him post on social media something like, if there were as many pedophiles in the circus, there were as many pedophile clowns in the circus as there are religious men in America, they'd close down the circus tomorrow. I mean, there are just so many of them. I mean, it's a way to gain credibility with people, is by saying you're a man of virtue, and then you create trust, and then you assault them.
Yeah, projection, right? And it's systemic in the evangelical faith and the Catholic faith. I can't remember the stat, but I looked it up the other day, because I compared America to Afghanistan in terms of freedoms, in terms of sexual assault, life expectancy, and it's pretty close. Like Afghanistan, you can get married to a child when they're 9. It's 12
into what
it's
a lot
12 in 33 states. There are no child marriage laws. As a matter of fact, those 33 states have all actively lobbied for the ability for men to marry young children. Like, I'm not kidding you. And it's always
and there's all kinds of other medieval types. I mean, I don't know if you have this in Canada, but we have legalized physical punishment. What do they call it? Corporal punishment in a lot of red states. Like, you can give permission to your kid's teacher to beat your kid with a paddle.
Yeah,
do you guys have paddles?
Just send a note to the school. Hey, you're more than welcome to kick my kid's ass.
Yeah. That's a huge swath of America. And that's a lot of who we are. It's not wrong to compare us to a lot of other primitive countries. I mean, we also, you go to any other country and they look at our gun violence and our capital punishment, death penalty that we have, and our lack of health care. And they're like, you people are not evolved.
So let me ask you a question then. How is it possible for the past, Canada's been shit posted for the last year and a half, 2 years. Right. Canada doesn't have those same laws. Child marriage in this country is highly illegal. Not only that, we've got laws against grooming. We've got laws against gun ownership. We don't have school shootings. We don't have mass shootings. If we do, I think there's been 30 in the past 10 years. right? I think there were 680 in the United States last year alone. I think there were 60 school shootings. What qualifies as mass shooting? 3 or more people shot in one sitting. So that's the metric in the United States.
Our gun violence issue is none of that, though. I mean, it's all of that, but the main statistic that people always forget to quote is suicide. So, I mean, lots and lots and lots of young men and young people blow their heads off.
Yeah, and I think that sits in the child death rate category, I believe,
Yeah,
as well.
Or accidental shootings. I mean, it's just, I mean, you think of the more horrible ones optically, and obviously gang violence and all of that. Domestic abuse is a huge one, but people don't as much think about suicide because when you try to kill yourself, oftentimes you fail, but you rarely fail if you're using a gun.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I appreciate you bringing that up.
And that's why one of the ideas that Americans want, I'll let you get to your question, but one of the policies that would be really huge is creating a waiting period. If you create a waiting period, this young man or this man in a midlife crisis, I was there, you'd have to wait a day before you get your hands on that gun. And guess what? A lot of things can change in your life in a day, as they have in all of our lives, and you move away from the brink, and that saves lives if you create a waiting period. But obviously Republicans advocate against waiting. They want you to be able to buy a gun right now, right this second. So of course you can fight all the bad people that are about to break in your home or shoot you at the store or whatever it is for self-defense reasons. So sorry, but I interrupted you with your larger point, I think.
No. I appreciate that. It's good context. But I wonder, knowing the reputation in the United States, which has been solidified over the past several years and absolutely taking it in the keister right now, how is it possible for like the average American to look at Canada and to post the things that I've seen them post about this country? Like, specifically with the tariff war, and we'll get to it. How is it possible that an American can know the way of life in the United States, specifically, and I'll just take the average American, someone who's kind of, center middle, someone who's just happy to go to work, get home, feed their family, enjoy a nice meal, might vote for Trump, but based on other things, might vote Democrat, but based on other things. Like, that's something that unless your country's completely ignorant about the social equity and the safety and the quality of life in this country, is it education or is it just hubris in America where it's like, yeah, America number one? Like, what is that?
It's all of that. Education plays a huge part. We have a lot of great public schools, and I work with a lot of those teachers and unions, but we have a lot of bad ones too. We have a lot of under-resourced ones. We have a lot of undervalued public schools, and then our education system and the influences upon it are a myriad of necessarily bad things. But yeah, it's our lack of teaching civics. Media literacy is a huge problem here. So when you see something online, you can't critically think about it and debunk it, which happens to the best of us, the smartest of us. So if you don't have that kind of training, you're definitely going to be hoodwinked. It's our propensity to buy into a lot of this conspiratorial stuff, that reality show atmosphere that I mentioned earlier. And yeah, it's our hubris in that we don't travel, we don't leave, we don't care about you or anybody else in the rest of the world. And to be clear, we don't care about each other. We don't care about each other unless you know someone well. Do we care about each other? Which is where government comes in, because government kind of forces you to care about your neighbor. And I have two examples of that. One is our health insurance system in America and the fight that we had publicly around it, where people on the right overwhelmingly said, I don't have to pay for your health insurance. I take good care of myself. You don't. Why should I be responsible for you? And people fall into and believe that binary, which is the height of stupidity. Obviously, you're only hurting yourself and your child, even more importantly, when you think that you can go it alone. And then all of a sudden, as happened in my case, when I lost my corporate job, lost my health insurance, that's when I had a health issue. Not mine, my daughter. That's when she was diagnosed with severe scoliosis, which wasn't life-threatening, but it was a lot of money, and we didn't have insurance anymore. And so it's a huge, huge issue. And until you live it, you don't know it. So most Americans have insurance and don't know what it's like to have the nightmare of not having it or being underinsured. And we just don't care about each other. And then the other example is COVID. COVID proved we don't care about each other here. We don't care. I don't care about you. And I think that we need to realize that a lot of us do. And a lot of us believe in all kinds of important things around community and humanity and society, and understand socialism and why we should have it. And we have it, by the way. The NFL is a socialist entity, and so is the VA, the Veterans Care Organization in America, and plenty of other entities, the fire department, the police department. We have plenty of tenets of socialism, but people demonize it and think that it's, Soviet era communism because of the propaganda that we get fed each and every day by the right wing, fed into us by their unbelievably effective radio, TV, YouTube, podcast shows for years, for generations here. And so we are ignorant, and we are undereducated, and we are, in a lot of ways, very privileged, a lot of us. Those of us that don't know adversity, because we always had a lot of good stuff. Our parents had jobs, we had health insurance, we had safety in our neighborhood. We don't realize what it's like to not have it. When you do, that's when people, start to lose their innocence, and sometimes even start to take roles in activism and policy creating and run for office sometimes. But unfortunately, you have to have this lived experience, because we don't listen to you or anybody else in the rest of the world. And we're certainly not coming to your countries and respecting how you do things. It's like we make fun of every wonderful policy that other countries have. We make fun of it. It's fodder. In Denmark, they ride bikes, pussies.
Canada, you're not allowed to own a handgun. Losers. Right.
Cowards who don't care about freedom and liberty. And I would say, more than anything else, you're beta cucks who don't want to protect your families. Like, I'm protecting my, and that's the kind of rhetoric we use, sheep, you're sheep, and you're beta cucks, and you're not real. Your country and our country and every nation has always had, all kinds of issues around gender and insecurity and about our masculinity. I have it, by the way, and in different ways. I have a little dog. You think that's easy? But it's always ironic when you have some guy calling you gay. By the way, he's wearing the name of another man on his back. I had a guy call me gay because I was wearing Crocs, which I understand, but he was wearing a Giants jersey, and I was like, dude, you have another man's name on your back right now. You're wearing, and he goes, so what? And I go, well, I don't know. I mean, it's gayer than my shoes.
They forget those things, right? It's funny because you get called. I get called all kinds of names. I think everybody in this space does. Like, it's very different from when I was on the radio.
I mean, I don't see it as a pejorative to be called gay. It's not a put down to me, and I embrace it. Like, I'll convince someone that I am gay just to mess with them. And I almost was in 1993 in a steam room at Equinox, but I needed the money. But I don't see that in any way as, less than gender or sexual orientation or sexual identity. It doesn't make you less than me. As a matter of fact, I'm now curious about you.
Well, dude, I have several friends who are gay. I have a trans friend. I have, and the courage that those, and how tough they have to be to live in a world where everybody's constantly throwing logs on the path of your journey, treating you like shit. And then you got to admit that you might feel a certain way, and you might have to change your appearance, or you might have to take hormones, you might have to get surgery. And what goes through that, like, if you've ever talked to anybody, to your point about every single MAGA cuck or MAGA beta cuck who's like, you protect the trans aren't people. There's only two genders. By the way, no one's ever heard of the XY chromosome theory. It blows my mind.
Yeah, they don't care about that kind of scientific evidence or reason or debate, critical thinking.
To use it as a pejorative, Pete, they clearly have never met a gay or trans person. They're the toughest fucking people I know. Without question.
And they're afraid that they might be. And that's where a lot of that obviously comes from. Any guy that's like calling you gay, and it's constant online, especially. And everywhere I go, I'm always looking at him. Like, I feel a little bit of compassion for him. Like, that guy's confused. He's just a couple beers away from a dick. But getting back to your point earlier, and I want to make sure I say this to your audience, and Americans don't really understand this either. I mean, any country's journey is often a timeline of rights won. Like in America, if you looked at American history from our independence to now, you would see the fight for human and civil rights, starting obviously with Black folks against slavery, right? Abolition of slavery, and then to get the vote, and then women's suffrage, women getting the vote, right? Starting there. But then you get into obviously the Jim Crow era, where a lot of Americans in the South people of color still didn't have voting rights. That's why the civil rights movement of the 60s, led by Dr. King and Malcolm X and lots of women that don't get named, that they were fighting for voting rights. They were fighting for all kinds of rights, be able to sleep at this hotel, eat at this lunch counter, travel unabated, obviously have access to the ballot. Most importantly, America's story is a story of the fight for those rights. And Trump is doing everything he can to repeal all those rights. Make no mistake, this whole DEI initiative, that's just cover for getting rid of all of the rights won by the civil rights movement, many of which died for that. It's all about trying to get back. I mean, and forget about the civil rights movement. Think about labor rights. We used to have 8-year-olds in coal mines. Somebody said that to me the other day, and I thought I fact checked him in the moment. I was like, there was never 8-year-olds. Yeah, there was 8-year-olds. They want to get rid of all rights that we have gained. And that's the easiest way to look at this. And we are not going to let them.
Child labor was common in the United States for the colonial period through the 1950s. To your point, one out of every in 1870 census found that one out of every child under the age of 8 was employed. To your point, usually as chimney sweeps. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't have any problem with putting an 8-year-old in the chimney. Who else is going to?
They're so small, right? You got to get them in there.
It's either that or a very small man, which I think,
you can't do that. That's discrimination. They're called midgets.
Small white men are mad because they're bringing a lot of small people of color into those chimneys, and they're taking their jobs. The other thing I love to say to the white guy who thinks he got passed over by the black guy for a job is, did you ever think you were just the worst white guy?
Yeah, dude, I had this conversation with a buddy of mine the other day. Trudeau's very progressive. There's a guy named Pierre Poilievre who's like the dollar store Trump, the Temu version of Trump up here. He's just a piece of shit. Yeah. So he's a big Pierre Poilievre guy. I'm apolitical. I could give two shits. I just like character. I like values. I want to know the person is qualified and they can lead the country. Whoever you stump for doesn't bother me. So he goes all in on Justin Trudeau being gay, being a pedophile, all these things that got put out by Russia and MAGA, trying to, get their conservative guy to the front of the line and in office here in Canada. So we're sitting around talking about exactly what it is that he likes or what he doesn't like about Justin Trudeau and what he doesn't like about Canada. And to your point, every single thing he said was a trope. It was like a carbon copy of like everything that you hate about about Joe Biden, who might be one of the most effective presidents in the history of the presidency, right? He brought your country back from the dead after Trump really tried to kill it. And I sit and listen to the rhetoric where you're going through this like laundry list of things and issues that this gentleman has, with our prime minister, with our social setting and the contract that he has with, these Canadians, like which is just, hey, listen, you can't do anything stupid past your nose, right? That's what the Charter of Rights and Freedom says, which is if you impinge on my freedom, then that's illegal. You're not allowed to do that. And every single thing this guy said was a product of, bullshit that gets regurgitated online. Like literally every single thing he said.
That's how we talk. That's how we learn. And then we regurgitate it. And it makes us feel smart and powerful.
Yeah. And to your point, when I sat and listened to him, and I literally just, it was almost like I had to turn my brain off a little bit and just assume to the point where I actually felt sorry for that individual, right? So when I look at a guy like you in the United States, obviously having to walk away from certain friendships, and there's friendships I still have with people. Like I've got a guy who's a big Trump guy. Like he's been to a couple of Tucker tour shows. Like he's one of those dudes. Yeah. Like big time. He's been to a couple in the States. He's got his MAGA hat and he likes to troll me with it. But it's the same bullshit from each one of these individuals, which is like, I can tell you according to feeling why I hate progressivism, but it's all about what they're told might happen to them. It's, back to the DEI thing. They're all told this fantastic story that, because black people built Boeing planes, they're falling out of the sky, right? Same thing. Because they're allowing gay people or trans people in certain bathrooms, airplanes aren't working anymore, right? Like that to me was like, or the wildfires in California.
Well, they're forced to hire. The idea is they're forced to hire unqualified people to meet some politically correct quota, which is I think that you have to be a person who was hit in the head, drank lead, or, a product of American media, really, because, I don't want to insult people's intelligence, because a lot of these people are actually really smart, but they just get poisoned. Good people getting poisoned by bad media, and they have a precognitive bias maybe for it, but nonetheless, they wouldn't have gone down that road. It's all bullshit. It's almost entirely bullshit. And we can talk about DEI, and we can have a thoughtful discussion about it, and we should. But this point of view that, a lot of white folks have. I mean, today, Trump, or yesterday, announced this task force to look into discrimination against Christian Americans. So it's the victim. They're the victims. They're being marginalized and minimized by non-Christians, or by black folks, or by women, or by trans people, or by gay people.
Muslims.
And, meanwhile, most of the people in the Trump administration, his highest profile hires, are DEI. And before Trump hired them, they were their definition of DEI, meaning the vast majority of billionaires and wealthy people in general, certainly in America, got their wealth through inheritance. They started with that wealth. They started there. That's DEI. They were given a huge amount of wealth. Donald Trump, Elon Musk, most billionaires, or, at least with the private school or something, they got the best things. They got a huge head start, and that's discounted. But more importantly, Lara Trump just got a job, just got her own show on Fox News. Is that because she was the best person for the job? Or is it because Donald Trump met with Rupert Murdoch and said, I need you to do something for me? And Rupert Murdoch said, where am I? There's 104.
So let me ask you a question. You're a media guy, right? What, you started in radio? You started in radio. You had a radio show on Sirius XM. You were on CNN as a man on the street. You've warmed up for Colbert. You've opened for Artie Lang, but really cut your chops in mainstream media. Do you remember a time where you can get in trouble for being full of shit in media? Because I do. I totally do.
Yeah. I mean, when I was working at CNN, I had plenty of pushback, because I really tested the boundaries when I started there. And for sure, I mean, I got scolded when I was covering the Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert rally for sanity. I think it was 2010. And it was in Washington, D.C., and it was this big rally. And Stewart and Colbert did this big live performance. And there were thousands of people in D.C. at this event in the summer. It was really fun. And I had just been hired there, and the job I had before that was literally opening for Stephen Colbert every night at the Colbert Report, Comedy Central, in the studio there. And then next thing I'm on air on CNN covering the event for CNN. I'm on air. Wolf Blitzer tosses to me, and I'm standing on top of a van in the middle of DC at this giant event, Dean, and Wolf is like, what's the atmosphere like? And I'm like, it's amazing. Everybody, we're having a great time. It's like we're partying out here, Wolf, and whatever. I said, back to you. And then I get a call, CNN lawyers back in the van. Pete, this is Eric. Oh, hey, Eric. I know the guy a little bit. He goes, listen, repeat after me. You're covering the event. You're not part of the event. So to be clear, he was taking issue with me not presenting myself as a journalist, but as part of the party, right? And he was trying to tell me, so I, in my naivete and youth and inability to handle criticism, much less someone telling me what to do, and I'm a comedian, so I always have something right here ready, and sometimes I say it, and too often I do. I said back to him, I go, repeat after me, Eric. You hired a comedian, not a journalist. Click. I have now see myself as a journalist now a lot more than I certainly did then, but he was right and I was wrong. But that's an anecdote of I was also at CNN. I was hosting my own show for 8 weeks there, and one of the things I wanted to do is covering the 10-year anniversary of our occupation of Afghanistan. And I had done a lot and been very involved in veterans community and so on. And I wanted to show video of American flag draped coffins coming home. And the CNN executives would not let me do that. So there were always censors in place and editorial guidelines and a commitment to try to get it right. If not for ethics, for financial, you don't want to get sued. So that's a long-winded answer. Yeah, I do remember those times. And I think there are a lot of journalistic media outlets that are still trying to do a good job, legacy outlets, but certainly a lot more of us independents. But how do you know if someone like me is dedicated to, the truth, or where does that credibility lie? And how am I influenced by, any number of my subscribers or sponsors and so on? And so that's a test that every one of us should have to pass to our audiences. And that's a test that every audience, every listener, every subscriber should have for their information outlets. And I'm proud of my record, and my conscience is clear.
Would you be able to because you're in a different space, we're all in a different space now. If you came from mainstream media and you're doing a podcast, or you've got a passion to inform people, or a passion to advocate with your humor in a journalistic way, which is what you do, Pete, at StandUP, the podcast. I encourage everybody to go download it anywhere you get your fine podcast. StandUP with Pete Dominick. Do you feel like there's a more chilling effect this time around, though? As like, are you afraid to do content? And I ask you that from like a general perspective, because I know you a little bit, and we've had a couple conversations, so I know you generally have to be unafraid to be able to kind of sit in front of a microphone and kind of spit fire the way that you do on a daily basis, and talk about the things you do and take on the topics that you do. But you talk to other people in media. Are you afraid? Are they afraid?
I'm not afraid yet. I haven't seen any reason to be yet. I think if I had a job in corporate media, I would be afraid. And to be fair, I was afraid of losing my job when I was in corporate media, but not because I thought the federal government was going to come for me. I thought the executives wouldn't, I wouldn't get the numbers I was getting, or perform well enough. But you're talking about the federal government interfering in our ability to practice our free speech.
Yeah. So just to kind of get, to give you an example, or to give people listening an example with Pete, CBS, 60 Minutes, the FCC sided with Donald Trump. This was supposed to be a body that lives outside of, government control. A Trump appointee says, hey, we're going to review every single second of the interview with Kamala Harris, including the shit that was on the cutting room floor, because Donald Trump filed a $10 billion lawsuit. So, CBS is towing the line. George Stephanopoulos, he settles a lawsuit for $15 million, which was absolutely fucking ridiculous. The threats to Comcast and other organizations like CNN continue to roll in. Trump wants to pull anybody who's unfriendly to Trump off the air. To your point, being afraid of government intervention in free speech. These are the free speech icons. Like Trump a couple of days ago was like, I save free speech in America. And then he started suing outlets that started to report honestly on him. And now you're not seeing a bunch of honest reporting. So that's the question that I have. Like, are you afraid the government's going to come for you? Do you have conversations in America? Canada's a very different ecosystem. Do you have conversations in America with people that are doing really good journalism, honest journalism, trying to advocate for facts and truth, that are afraid to do so, or have been told, hey, cool it?
Not yet. I have great relationships with hundreds of the biggest names in both legacy media and independent media. And I have a pretty good understanding of what's happening, I think, right now in vis-a-vis the federal government, the Trump administration, and their threats. And, the example that you gave, you can explain many of these examples, but when you have CBS is not just CBS the way it used to be, right? It is owned by Paramount, which is owned by Sherry Redstone, who is the heir to Sumner Redstone's media fortune. Sherry Redstone wants to merge with another media company, I think film company, called Skydance. And the only way that merger happens is if the federal government approves it. So Donald Trump is doing this to get CBS to look bad, bend the knee, go on Truth Social and say they lied and it was the worst thing any journalist has ever done. He did that today. They didn't. CBS put out the whole transcript of that tape, and there's nothing untoward at all, or unusual at all. But he also wins money in some of these cases personally, because he gets the money in these civil suits. So he gets a cool $20 million, and he gets CBS in this case to look terrible, which degrades any, the credibility that an outlet like 60 Minutes has left, whatever credibility they might have left. And that's the goal. And it's not similar to someone like me or someone in our lane, but bigger than me, like the Bulwark or the Pod Saves America guys. And so until I see him going after them, and the issue, it's hard to do that to us because we don't have interests at play at the federal government. We're not giant consolidated media companies. And while we might be indemnified, if you sue us, what are you going to get from me? what are you assuming? I have a Peabody Award in my varsity letter. I mean, like, it doesn't make sense. It does make sense if we're influencing people to silence us. Yeah. And so I'm sure they will try to do that. But I don't think that's that easy to do with the access that we all have to, until I see, them shutting down all of the video chats that we're using from Zoom to the other ones, our microphones, threatening our host sites, our websites, our families, whispers in the night. I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it yet. And even if I do, bring it.
I like that, Pete. You're one of the good guys. I really appreciate that, because there's not a lot of profiles in courage now. You line up where the money is, and obviously the money is in, bending a knee, kissing the ring, whether you're a media company or not. We've seen every single oligarch go up there, the richest guys in America that operate all the information warfare highways, right? Whether it be Facebook, whether it be Twitter, whether it be TikTok, right? Is the control of that information space, which keeps people so stupid.
But I want to push back on the courage thing. Like, I want to be clear. I might sound courageous, or might sound tough, but that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, we all have a lot to lose. If they threatened my family, which they did, I kept going though. And my kids didn't feel safe about that, but I felt like I was covering, I felt like they were safe, and they have been. I think people have real concerns, and I have real fear. And I'm very scared that they're going to shut me down, or that they're going to hurt me or my family. I'm really scared of it. But it's not about courage. To me, it's like my honor, my credibility, my integrity is more important to me than necessarily a lot of other things that other people see, like financial security and so on. Like, of course I care about those things, but I would have a hard time like existing and being happy and making it through the day if I didn't feel like I was doing the right thing by my community, by myself. That's how I was raised. And that's the only way I know. My older brother like radicalized me this way when I was very young, and I would be letting him down. I would be letting myself down. So it's almost less about courage and more about kind of purpose. Mm-hmm. And this is my purpose, and this is what I like to do. Other people like to do woodworking, which I also like to do. I'm not good at it. I have a lot of hobbies and interests, but for me, this is my work. This is who I am. It's part of my identity, and you can't shed that. I can't turn away from it. If someone want to pay me $250,000 to ride a horse through the woods, I would sell out right now, though.
I love how you got the old guy hobby now too, right? Woodworking. Everybody's like,
I got all kinds of hobbies and interests. I'm always keeping busy.
Old guy hobbies, like bird watching, right?
Yeah, I'm a gardener. I have a huge garden. I grow plants inside.
Do you? Oh, yeah. I didn't know that. Yeah, you got to stay sane somehow, Pete.
Yeah, for sure.
Pete Dominick is our guest. StandUP is the name of his podcast. He's an American. I believe this is the first of its kind. By the way, there are no. I looked on Apple. I looked for podcasts where an American podcaster of note and a Canadian podcast of smaller note, 10 times smaller. By the way, just via population. Happy to say so. I was looking on. This is the very first cross-border podcast. Did you know that? Good. Yeah. Great. This is the very first one where an American guy and a Canadian guy with similar values, similar virtues have gotten on a podcast and said, "Hey, what's it like there?" And you're like, "I don't know. What's it like here? I don't know. You tell me." No, you tell me. So I got a question for you. Then you can ask me, because I want to do a little thing here called Ask an American. And then you can do Ask a Canadian.
I would love to. I love it.
We'll clam it up. You go first.
How do you think most Canadians think about our healthcare system, and would they ever want to trade it? I realize that you have to pay more in taxes for it, and I realize there are all kinds of problems with it. I understand it actually pretty well, but I would love to know the current understanding of your comparison and how you might see our healthcare system as we make you the 51st state. Do you know what you're in for in dealing with your claims and how much it's going to cost you to have your teeth looked at?
I do. The average Canadian doesn't. So great question. I'm glad you asked a healthcare question. And I'll sum it up with a stat, which most Canadians are aware of at this point. Last year in your United States of America, 540,000 Americans declared medical bankruptcy.
Yeah. Yep.
In Canada, that number is a grand total of 0. Not one person declared medical bankruptcy. We know you get access if you have money in the United States, but the same thing goes here. We've got two-tier healthcare system. We just don't like talking about it. But everybody in Canada can go into the hospital, have a baby, get their leg fixed, have open heart surgery, lung replacement, all kind. You could have your bladder taken out, you can get your wiener extended, you can do all kinds of stuff in Canada. And guess what? You walk out of that hospital and you give a high five to the nurses and the doctors, and you go home and you do not get a bill. How does that suck?
I mean, I wonder if Canadians understand. I bet you don't, what it's like. By the way, do you do widening as well as lengthening? You have a girth issue. I mean, my friend does.
So if you have, and let me get it. It varies by province. I have looked into it for myself. If you have a condition known as micropenis, you can get it lengthened and widened. Just so you know. Yeah.
Well then,
you're welcome.
Let's talk off air.
Okay.
So I think it's really important just to note that, like, in America, when I had an awesome healthcare plan at a private media company, SiriusXM, and a 401k and all that too, but a lot of benefits. But when just healthcare, I was always worried about losing that job, Dean. I always lived in fear of losing that job because my wife's also an independent contractor. And what were we going to then do for health insurance? What would we do?
It's that important.
My worst fear came true, and I did lose that job. Luckily, because of Obamacare, we were able to qualify for subsidized private insurance. But the issue is, when you don't have insurance or you don't have good insurance and you're looking for a job, you're living with a lot of fear just around financial security. One of the things you might want to do to cope is go for a mountain bike ride or take a run or ski. But then you're worried, I can't even do the thing I need to do to cope with this depression and anxiety, because what if I get hurt? Then I'll be further in the hole. I think Canadians and people that don't live in our system or haven't, and including Americans, haven't had to go through it, don't understand what it's like to have your child without health insurance, much less you. And the fear that creates and the hesitation that it creates to live a life, it's almost paralyzing for a lot of us. It also really, decreases your interest in going it alone and being an entrepreneur, because if I left my company to start my own, even if I had a whole bunch of capital, I couldn't afford the insurance for my employees. So why would I go do that? Why would I ever leave? There's just a real thing called job lock in America. You're locked in this job just because of the health insurance, and you need it because your kid has asthma. That's a real thing in America, and it is not freedom, and it's not liberty. It is a horror show, and it's the worst fears that they talk about actually lived, because you have to worry about losing your health insurance for you, or God forbid, your kid who has any number of chronic illnesses or issues or accidents or plays sports or whatever.
We see that doesn't even register here.
Yeah, it registers here.
You get extra health care. Like, you get extra benefits where you go work for a company like yours, just to give you some context about it in Canada. Health insurance, like prescriptions, are covered in Canada, right?
Yeah.
We got $10 daycare in Canada. Like, and I'm not kidding you. Across the country, $10 a day for your kid. People
have kids in America because they know they can't afford daycare. And I'm talking about wealthy people that like when we had kids, my first daughter in Manhattan, we couldn't afford to put her in preschool there. We had to leave the city because preschool, which is basically daycare, and minimize it, there's some education, couldn't afford it.
Again, doesn't even register. Yeah. I know it did for a long period of time, but that changed over the past 2 years, where Canada got $10 daycare for everybody. Wow. And if you know why Canada ranks like 1, 2, 3 with any Scandinavian country like Norway or Sweden in terms of quality of life and the happiness index, is because those stressors are gone, right? The stressors of having to pay for a heart attack or open heart surgery, the stress of having to put your kid in.
Yeah, that's a real thing.
Yes. Education.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Luckily for me, for me personally, I don't know if you can tell, but like my physical body is, and I'm in perfect health, and my physical body is like impeccable. Like I'm kind of like a temple with no issues at all. My teeth are perfect. And so, I mostly have no hair. So luckily for me, I have no issues to be concerned about. And, most Americans don't have the kind of perfection that I embody. The kind of symmetry in my skeleton. You don't see it.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. Okay, my question.
I have a back issue that's killing me so much, and I feel my vertebrae moving. And you know what? There's nothing I'm going to do about it, like a lot of other men, because I don't want to have to pay for that appointment.
Yeah, you're going to put up with it. Same reason why I don't get my teeth cleaned all the time. It's like, I'll just deal with it until it gets bad.
That's a little bit different.
Yeah, I think so. It might be.
You're a filthy man.
I want to ask you a question before I let you go.
Your turn. Yes.
I want to know how a progressive American feels about your Second Amendment right.
Well, it depends on how educated you are, but the vast majority of Americans, regardless of their politics, overwhelmingly support all types of regulations on purchasing and owning firearms. The vast majority, including, you asked about progressives' view, conservatives' view. When asked in polling questions, there is tremendous amount of data. They overwhelmingly support background checks, universal background checks, waiting periods, limited amounts of bullets in a magazine, limited types of firearms that can be sold. And some of these things wouldn't work or would. But the bottom line is, when most Americans are asked about regulations on firearm ownership and usage, they support them. And the problem is, and in states that have Democrats, majorities, and governors, we have passed all kinds of regulations, including states with a lot of Republicans in them voting for them. Unfortunately, we have the Supreme Court that basically thinks that Americans, as a result of their new interpretation of the Second Amendment, because up until like the early 80s, no court justice, including conservatives, thought the Second Amendment meant that anybody could have personal ownership and no regulations on guns. Everything is regulated. Every right is regulated. Speech is regulated. So the vast majority of Americans support regulations on guns, but the way that our Congress is made up and our Supreme Court is made up, it doesn't represent the interests of Americans. So it misleads the rest of the world in thinking that we're all crazy and don't want to do anything about it, when in fact the vast majority of us want to do something about it.
Great answer. It would be weird growing up knowing like you had the right to free speech, like the second you come out of the womb. You study all the amendments and you're like, first one is I could say whatever I want, do whatever I want, come and go as I please. The second one is my God-given ability to own a firearm.
Yeah, I mean, they say God-given too. Like, God gave us our rights. No, he didn't.
Yeah.
No, there is no God. You gave you your rights. You can take them away tomorrow. You can give new ones tomorrow if you want. You don't have to ask God. Like, that's what we used to live in a country that valued and was founded on a separation from church and state. It was founded by people who were trying to get away from that. And only because of a movement that has never given up, this right-wing version of Christianity, these militant Christians, had those views changed about where we get our rights from. It's so silly. It's a silly thing to buy that and to believe that, but it's not silly. It's real, because we're seeing Bibles be put in schools. There's the 10 Commandments are up on the wall.
Yeah,
in Oklahoma schools, and
Dude, that's our next podcast. I want to get into work history and religion as it relates to Christian nationalism, and I want to do it again with you, where we cross the border and have a conversation about some of the differences and what's going on in America. We can report back to Canadians. We can talk about Canadians and report back to Americans. But more importantly, Pete, I really appreciate getting to know you. Thanks for reaching out. Thanks for doing this with us today. Really appreciate it.
Likewise. We've created a really cool new friendship relationship here, and I'm looking forward to doing it again and keeping this conversation going until they come for me and put me in a camp with other progressive commentators. I'm excited about being in a camp with Rachel Maddow. Finally.
Yeah, you and Maddow at Gitmo.
Get that opportunity to interview her. She's turning me down too many times that she's going to be forced to, and I'm the last person with a piece of bread.
Yeah, you, Maddow, Dan Rather, I imagine, is probably going to be like one of the RAs.
Really well.
Is he a great guy? I feel like he's a great guy.
He is a great guy. He did one weird thing, which is a product of his age and gender and career, which was, we worked together at SiriusXM. They gave him a radio show years after he left CBS, and I got to know him really well. We share a birthday, and he gave me he said a lot of really nice things to me off and on air. But and so he's a great guy. But he said to my young, attractive female producer at the time, we were on location. We were covering the RNC, and he said, "Darling, could you go get me a glass of milk?" And it was inappropriate to call her darling. And glass of milk?
He just likes milk. Maybe he's calcium D deficient, dude. Maybe
it was hilarious and slightly sexist at the same time. She wasn't upset. I wasn't really upset. I think we got him the milk, but I just that's my favorite Dan Rather story. And when you press stop, I'll tell you a Tom Brokaw story.
Oh, very good. Well, get the Tom Brokaw story. I'm going to press stop. That is Pete Dominick. Stand Up with Pete Dominick is the name of his podcast. Good man out of New York, trying to do good work to keep people informed and stand up for democratic progressive Americans, which makes up, I would say, 75% of that country. Unfortunately, not everybody voted for Trump, but we've got 4 years to have this conversation. Pete, really appreciate it. Where can people find you, by the way?
So the best thing I'm doing now is I've created a community around the podcast. So yeah, I post a podcast every day, standupwithpete.com. But I urge you to come check out our community. I host these hangouts, which are like parties every Monday and Thursday. Okay. Last night we did it with 80 people there. I had a lot of special guests, celebrities stop by, pop in. Started during the pandemic and when I started this podcast and independent media, and it's just gone on every Thursday. And then since Trump got reelected, I added a night. So I somehow host, produce, book, edit, promote a podcast every day, sometimes even Saturday and Sunday. And I host these hangouts, which I invite you to come to for free if you want to test one out. There's amazing people, real diversity of thought, ethnic, religion, age. You get everybody, but we all live kind of on Earth One and support each other. And community is the most important thing in life, and certainly now. And so I would encourage people to try to stop by that.
Website?
StandUpWithPete.com or Patreon.com/Pete Dominick to pay, and then you get the all-time. You can come by anytime, but you don't have to pay. If somebody wants to come from your audience, see those hangouts, I'll give them the link. They're welcome to come by for free.
So nice of you. So altruistic of you. I really appreciate that. I'll pay, but I also want to come and hang out with you on one of those Mondays or Thursdays.
Love to have you. I would love to have you. You just have to send me, your best bottle of maple syrup or some kind of Canadian made thing that we can support and promote, and we'll do it for sure.
We've got some great shrooms up here. If I can figure out a way to get those down there.
I want to do that. I want to be held, I want to do a guided one. I don't want to have some recreational trip for my first time.
No, dude, I'm more than happy to introduce you to some people that can take you down that river.
Yeah.
Easily the best thing I've ever done. One of our major partners is a psychedelic assisted therapy clinic. Cannot believe the difference in my life and the lives of others too. But it also would say, fuck, it's just super fun getting smoked.
I want to do the one where you get a happy ending. So whatever that one is.
Oh, no, that's just going to a rub and tug, dude.
Oh, then maybe I'll do it at a rub and tug. You delete this all. That was all. I don't want to go to any of those. I don't want to go to a rub and tug, and I don't want to do psychedelics at a rub and tug. I wish I had left about 30 seconds ago.
Pete Dominick, thanks, dude. Really appreciate it. We'll talk to you very soon. There you go, everybody. My friend Pete Dominick. He's out of the United States of America. Good New York kid. Trying to figure it out, trying to make his way through the MAGAverse, as they've got 4 years of bullshit at the very least to kind of go through. Highly encourage everybody to go and download his podcast as well. You can find that Stand Up with Pete Dominick anywhere you get your podcast, Spotify and Apple, of course. Stand Up with Pete that you can get at on .com, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's just exactly what he said. Let me just go get it. Let me see with Pete. And let me just make sure I got this. StandUpWithPete.com. That's where you can go find him, be part of his community. He's doing a lot of things for people with mental health as well. People that are transitioning, specifically men, something that we've talked about here quite a bit, knowing what you control and what you don't, being able to go from one stage of your life to another confidently, going through traumatic experiences and dealing with those things, and a little community of men and women, but mostly men who are trying to figure out life post different parts of their career. So anyway, highly encourage you to go and interact with Pete, StandUpWithPete.com, Stand Up with Pete Dominick, the name of the podcast, to go and download that and upload that. And speaking of getting better, speaking of treating yourself to a life of mental freedom, this podcast is brought to you by my friends at Field Trip Health, fieldtriphealth.ca. Access ketamine therapy in Canada. Leverage the power of ketamine therapy to help you find and hold on to the hope, healing, and happiness that you truly do deserve. Listen, numbers do not lie. 80% of people that have drug-resistant depression treatment-resistant depression, treatment-resistant anxiety and PTSD. Experience a response and relief with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy at fieldtriphealth.ca. You can book your discovery call now, absolutely free of charge. Get an appointment with a nurse practitioner and ask a bunch of questions. Listen, mental health is not something that's trite. Mental health is not something you want to mess with. And, it's like this cage. If anybody's ever had depression or anxiety, it's like this cage that goes over the quality of life that you wish to live, where you don't experience joy. You feel like a zombie. You're trying to unwrap that trauma. Speaking of trauma, and it's much, much easier to do when you're doing psychedelic assisted therapy, and you can access ketamine assisted therapy legally in Canada at Field Trip Health. They've got locations all over the country. They've got several locations in Ontario, Toronto, Ottawa, Hamilton, Kitchener, Waterloo, Thunder Bay, and the Sioux, Montreal, Quebec, Vancouver, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and Regina. They've also got a brand new groundbreaking at-home ketamine therapy treatment. Yeah, you can do it at home. And all you have to do is go to fieldtriphealth.ca to check it out. You can look at top-rated ketamine-assisted psychotherapy clinics in Canada. You can experience it through the eyes of different people that have gone through this experience. You can read testimonials, studies on ketamine therapy for pain management, ketamine therapy for depression and anxiety. You can listen to Field Tripping, the podcast, learn from leaders in the field, and, of course, keep it here. Log on here. Download our podcast anytime. We just finished a really, really educational podcast with a couple of the principals, including Dr. Mario Nucci, and Ian Rubery, the CEO of the clinic, founder and the CEO, just kind of educating us about the importance of your mental health and the role that psychedelics can play in it, and especially under a medically supervised counseling environment, therapeutic environment. Here in Canada, you can do that. First responders, people that are veterans, people that have seen some shit, if you will, and we all have in our own regard. So get better faster. Go to fieldtriphealth.ca for more details today. Have a great day, everybody. Don't forget, you can go to YouTube, get everything we do there. Dean Blundell Show, Crier Media on YouTube. You can also get everything we do wherever you get your podcasts, including Spotify and Apple. Be good to each other, right? And again, separate Americans from MAGA Americans. I say that all the time. We're going to be on this topic for a while. 25% of that country voted for that orange piece of shit. 75% did not. So separate the two. Nuance. Pete's American. Trumpers are MAGA Americans. They're the fascists. Have a great day, everybody. We will see you soon. Enjoy the weekend. Bye.